So unfortunately, reading for 24 hours did not happen. I don't know what it is about my reading style and my mood reading that makes it where once you tell me I have to read a book, even if it's a book that I wanted to read anyways, my interest just totally plummets. I have no want or desire to read that title anymore, so I did push through with 5 of the books on my list. So I'm going to go through the different titles that I did manage to get through and which of the remaining titles I am interested in reading at some point, hopefully this year, maybe before the books are due back at the library. One of the great things about library books is that you can always either extend your loan or check them out again if they interest you in the future. So the first book that I read during my 24, well, let's call it what it is, during my 14-hour reading vlog was Wild in Love, and it took me 3 hours and 43 minutes to read. Now, it was just under 400 pages, so I was pretty happy with the read time that I had reading this book by Eloisa James. I also really enjoyed it, so there were times that I slowed down in the reading so that I could pay a little bit more attention to what was going on. So we have Lord Alaric and Lady Willa. They are both staying at the same house for a season in the end of the summer. So it is to announce the engagement of Lord Alaric's older brother and his fiance or betrothed, and his betrothed is the cousin of Lady Willa's best friend. So Lady Willa is there as a guest of her best friend, and her best friend is there as a family member to the betrothed. So there were about 20 women staying at the castle, and Lord Alaric returned from his adventures across the globe. He is an author who has been sending back accounts of his adventures that he's been having, and because of that he has a huge fan club in many women, and they are in love with the idea of him but not necessarily in love with him as an actual person. So Lady Willa is not interested at all in Lord Alaric when he first comes home. She admits that he is handsome. She believes that her reactions to his presence are simply because he is a handsome man and not because there is potentially anything more between them. And as time goes on, she realizes that he is not as bad as she thought. And when someone from his past shows up hopelessly in love with him and claiming that they are engaged, Lord Alaric asks Lady Willa to pretend to be his betrothed so that he can try to avoid this young woman who is desperately in love with him. As you might presume, it does turn into a fake to real relationship situation that involves a couple of twists and turns that I was not expecting. So if you're interested in a Regency era romance that has a little bit more intrigue than just two people falling in love, but a significant twist in the form of another person, I would definitely check this one out. It is the first in this series, and this is a series that I am actually planning on continuing. I am going to save my star ratings and complete reasonings for that for the end of the month with my February wrap-up. So Wild in Love was our first book during the love-themed 24-hour, turned 14-hour readathon. The second book that I read and completed was The Feeling of Falling in Love. This book was not what I was expecting based on the inside cover synopsis. I didn't read any further, so I didn't realize that on the very first page before the book actually starts, it does say, "For every trans person who ever believed they were too complicated for a love story." So this is about a trans teenage boy, his friends with benefits, who is actually somebody he knows from home since they're at a boarding school, and then also our main character, our teenage boy's roommate. So I thought this would be a love triangle, however it turns out to be more of a enemies to lovers, fake to real relationship situation. So our main character, Neil, is going home for his older brother's wedding, and his friends with benefits, Josh's older brother, is Neil's older brother's best friend. So they do know each other from home. However, Neil never wanted to go to boarding school and felt like his mom sent him there after he came out to her as trans as a means of like sending him away and kind of getting rid of the problem child, if you will. And Neil asks his roommate Wyatt to accompany him home to be his new date for the wedding. Wyatt is at the boarding school on a scholarship, and he agrees to go home with Neil because he has never been on a vacation before and he has never even flown on a plane. So basically Neil realizes that there's a lot more to Wyatt than meets the eye. Wyatt is questioning his own gender and where he falls on the spectrum. There is also a nice representation of lesbian moms because Wyatt does have 2 moms. So overall, I really enjoyed this story. It touched upon a lot of different themes of representation that I think are really important for teenagers these days. So I was pretty happy that I picked this one up, and it was a relatively quick read. This one ended up taking me 2.5 hours to finish. Quicker than the last book, and it was shorter by about 50 pages. So overall, I would definitely recommend this. And stay tuned to my February wrap-up for my final star rating. The third book that I read during this readathon was Season of Love by Helena Greer. This was so good. I ended up recommending it to a friend as soon as I finished. It ended up taking me about 4.5 hours to read, which I was honestly surprised by because it is just over the 350 page mark, and it is a dual point of view contemporary romance, which is one of my favorite types of romance writing. However, I really was invested in the story between these 2 main characters, and there were so many layers to what was going on and so much past trauma that both had been through that I did take the time to really slow down and understand where both characters were coming from, what was happening in their own relationship, what was happening with them in relation to the other people in the story, and how they were able to find their way through everything that was going on. As a brief recap, it is about a Jewish family who owns a Christmas tree farm, and the matriarch of the Christmas tree farm has passed away. We find out that both of our 2 main characters, Noelle and Miriam, have some past trauma in regards to their own families. There are mentions of alcoholism and being the adult child of alcoholics. There are also some mentions of death and some significant parental abuse, both emotionally and financially, that goes on in the book. I thought it was a really great butch femme representation. There was a healthy amount of spice, but it was not incredibly detailed as it is in some contemporary books. I mean, this is traditionally published and I picked it up at Barnes & Noble, so I wasn't expecting it to be extremely spicy. I did really enjoy the banter between the 2 characters. I also enjoyed how much growth that there was individually inside of the 2 characters. So where there were some jumping to conclusions initially, they did both work through those issues separately before coming back together, or like really coming together at all. I was not prepared for Miriam being engaged in the beginning of the book. It's not mentioned at all. So if any sort of flirting while in a significant relationship bothers you, I wouldn't necessarily pick this book up, because Miriam is engaged to a woman named Tara, and we don't see Tara much throughout the story. However, she does play a bit of a significant role in some aspects. So that was a twist that I wasn't expecting. It didn't bother me necessarily because of the nature of Tara and Miriam's relationship, which they do explain pretty early on. But I do think that it's worth noting, if you pick this up, Miriam is engaged for a good portion of the book while she is meeting Noelle and figuring out how she feels about this situation overall. The 4th book, which took me just over an hour, about an hour and a half to read, was Iranian Love Stories by Jane Duard. This is a graphic novel, and I mentioned several times that I really loved some of the artwork that was going on. I think when we look at criticisms of another culture or celebrations of another culture, we expect all of the views to be relatively consistent, and we see the United States as something that's not necessarily incredibly culturally homogenous, but has some generalizations that you can kind of incorporate across the country. I thought that because these 2 journalists were undercover, that the Iranian love stories would be coming from maybe more of a critical point of view, but there were several stories and vignettes that they relayed where the people in the stories actually felt like they ended up on a positive note and they got what they wanted out of their lives situations. So that was really interesting. The artwork is incredible. It was originally published in 2013 in France and solely in French. It was recently translated and published in the US in 2021, so it is considered relatively new nonfiction. If you have ever wondered about what relationships in Iran, in a country that is under really strict laws for women, might look like, I highly recommend picking up this book. The final book that I read during this short 14-hour reading vlog was Love by Degree by Debbie McComber. This was part of the Learning to Love book, so there were actually 2 stories in here, Sugar and Spice and Love by Degree. I only read Love by Degree because it of course had love in the title, and honestly I wish I hadn't read it because I'm pretty sure that it put me into a minor reading slump during this vlog. So it was relatively short. It was like less than 200 pages. It was definitely written in the 80s, okay, I could tell you that. She wears a house coat. She's embarrassed because somebody sees her in jeans and a bra, which there are definitely people out there who are more modest. But she's basically, the main character, Ellen, is willing to go on dates with the landlord of her college housing situation, knowing that he's practically engaged to another woman, and she just decides to ignore the fact that he has this other woman in his life and says, well, what we do is separate from what he does with her. So she's convincing herself it's okay to be the other woman, but then gets upset when she sees the other woman, even though she's misunderstanding something herself. And then she goes off the deep end, and after one misunderstanding, packs her stuff, leaves, and moves out. So the third act conflict to me was just a little bit silly. I mean, if she was willing to talk about their relationship at any point in the entire story, then it could have been avoided, but she wasn't. So when something happened and she didn't like it, she completely lost her mind. So this kind of was not for me. I mean, I've tried Debbie McComber before, and I think that at this point in my life, she just comes off as a little bit too dated. I would recommend this for somebody who is looking for something very chaste, but not for someone who was looking for a love story that made sense. Unfortunately, this one did not make a lot of sense to me as a reader, so I was not the biggest fan. And I will be glad to return this one to the library. After the books that I read for this reading vlog, I was at 25 books for the year. I have read 2 more books since then. Neither of them were for this reading vlog, so I'll be talking about them in a separate video. But I am actually really happy that I've been pushing myself to read as much as I have and actually taking books out of my local library, because that's something that I really neglected to do last year. And I live just a couple of blocks from one of the branches of the library in my city, so I don't have an excuse. I really don't. I do use Libby, and that's where I use my library cards for the most part. I am trying to save some money this year after my massive January book haul, so that's going to be a challenge, but it should be made easier by me utilizing my local library. I'm going to quickly go through the remaining books that I have that I plan on still reading. So there are 4 books left from this library book haul that I did for the love themed video that I still plan on reading before I return them to the library or potentially in the future. The first is Love and Gelato by Jenna Evans Welch. This got some really great reviews on booktube, and although it is a little bit older at this point, it was originally published in 2016, I'm still interested in it, and I like that it's not just about romantic love but about familial love as well. So I am going to be bringing this with me this weekend when I go up and see my parents. The second book that I still plan on reading is Grendel's Guide to Love and War, a tale of rivalry, romance, and existential angst by A.E. Kaplan. I'm really interested to see the Beowulf references in this book. I'm going to add this one to the pile. It is a tiny bit water damaged actually, which does happen when you check something out from the library, but this one is just over 300 pages, so I think it'll actually be a pretty quick read because the text is like relatively big on page. Then the third book from the library is Wa'aka. I know that this is a children's book and it's relatively short, so I do want to sit down and read through it and see if it's a creation story that I can add to my Indigenous creation story lesson plan. The final book is not actually from the library, it's from my bookshelf, and that is All About Love by Bell Hooks. I am a lot slower on the nonfiction reading, so this might take me longer to get into and really give my attention to. I do want to annotate as I'm reading this one, so this is something that I may end up reserving for the summer when my graduate program is finished, and I can hopefully spend some time enjoying my reading and being able to really just sit outside, lose myself in a book, and take notes on everything that it has to offer. So with that, that is the end of my attempt at a 24-hour reading vlog. I don't think that I will be doing one of these again in the future unless it is a situation where I'm reaching the end of the year or the middle of the year and I want to try to catch up on books. I also might not pick a theme for the next one, so it might just be 24 hours of reading. That way I can go through either my Kindle Unlimited or what's on my bookshelf and just pick the next book that interests me instead of having a set list that I need to choose from instead, because that seems to be my bigger struggle. If you have read any of these books and you have an opinion on them, please let me know down in the comments. If there was another book that I mentioned in the first part of this 24-hour reading vlog, the TBR, that I did not get to that you want me to still read, let me know that too, because I would love to know what books worked for you and what books didn't. If there are any books that have love in the title that I didn't know about or didn't pick up but you think I might like, let me know that too. I am looking forward to finishing up some of the books this coming weekend. As always, stay safe, make good choices, and have a great night. Bye. I'm running late to get my nails done, so now I gotta go. There's so much traffic today that even if I shut my window, it wouldn't matter.